Madam President, the Senate has just restored itself to an almost unbroken tradition of never filibustering judges. We have actually restored the status quo before the administration of President George W. Bush. It was during that administration when some of our friends across the aisle, along with some of their liberal law professor allies, dreamed up a way of blocking President George W. Bush's judicial nominees. And that was by suggesting that 60 votes was really the threshold for confirming judges rather than the constitutional requirement of a majority vote. It's been a long journey back to the normal functioning of the United States Senate. And it's amazing that it's taken a nominee like Judge Gorsuch to bring us back to where we were back around 2001. We've been debating and discussing this nominee for a long time now, and they've tried, or the opponents of Judge Gorsuch have tried time and time again to raise objections to this outstanding nominee, a nomination that no one in the Senate opposed 10 years ago when he was confirmed to a position on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. They've claimed he wasn't mainstream enough. They've said this was a seat that really should have gone to Merrick Garland. They've even accused him of plagiarism. All of these arguments have no merit whatsoever and really represent desperate attempts to try to block this outstanding nominee. Their claims were simply baseless. And that much became even clearer as folks from across the political spectrum and newspapers from across the country urged our Democratic colleagues to drop their pointless filibuster and allow an up or down vote. What also came to light is the type of man Judge Gorsuch is, a man of integrity, a man of strong independence. In other words, exactly the kind of person you would want to serve on the United States Supreme Court. They even claimed that Judge Gorsuch went out of his way to side with the big guy against the little guy, ignoring the fact that during his 10 years on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, where these judges sit in multi-judge panels, that he was part of the majority decision 99% of the time. 97% of those cases were unanimous in multi-judge panel decisions on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. Hardly a radical. It actually is a remarkable record of a consensus builder, someone who uses his great intellect, his education, and his training to build consensus on a multi-judge court, exactly the kinds of skills that are going to be so important for him to use on the Supreme Court of the United States. So, as I said, ultimately today was a culmination of years of obstruction by our Democratic colleagues when it came to judicial nominees. When I came to the Senate in 2003, the Democrat strategy was well underway to obstruct lower court judicial nominees from the George W. Bush administration. And later, in 2013, when there was a Democrat in the White House and it suited them to do so, they decided to do away with the same tool they used and went nuclear, lowering the threshold from 60 to 51 majority vote for circuit court nominees and district court nominees. It took a gang of 14, 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans, to try to work through the differences back around 2006 timeframe, which resulted in half of President George W. Bush's nominees to the circuit courts getting confirmed and half not being confirmed. And the standard was adopted by this so-called gang of 14 that only under extraordinary circumstances would the filibuster be used. But that agreement expired in 2013. Well, the minority leader and his colleagues like to say that back then it was necessary to restore a majority vote. He did that on just last Sunday. He said our Republican colleagues had been holding back on just about all of so many lower court judges, including the very important D.C. Circuit Court, that they were forced to engage in the nuclear option back in 2013. But the facts really belie what the Democratic leader claimed in terms of the necessity of going nuclear back then. In fact, prior to 2013, the Senate had confirmed more than 200 of President Obama's judicial nominees and had rejected just 2. More than 200 confirmed, 2 rejected. That hardly rises to the level of extreme obstruction or partisanship. That's a 99% confirmation rate for President Obama. So let's make it clear just how this began. It started with Democratic obstruction under a Republican administration in 2001, and it's been continuing now under a new Republican administration in 2017. So we really have come full circle to restore the status quo before 2001, when our Democratic friends started down this path. President Trump has, by all accounts, selected a judge with impeccable qualifications and the highest integrity. Not one of our Democratic colleagues has been able to offer a convincing argument against him, and that's why several of our Democratic colleagues have crossed the aisle to support his nomination, and I thank them for that. I think more would join if they didn't fear retribution from the radical elements in their own political party. So today, Republicans in the chamber are following through on what we said we would do. We said we would let the American people decide who would select the next Supreme Court nominee, and then we would vote to confirm that nominee. The American people on November the 8th selected President Trump. President Trump nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch, and tomorrow we will confirm that nominee and deliver on that promise. Mr. President, I yield the floor.